Danger Dolan. Now we have a look at some of the worst raids ever introduced into Warcraft. Now people felt very strongly about these and they had quite a bit to say, so we'll try and get through them one at a time. First off, with some honorable mentions, or dishonorable mentions. To start off with, we have a comment from the BradTad93. Worst, going to go with Heart of Fear. I dreaded every minute I did this raid for progression. The bosses were annoying and the trash was worse. The cackling of the dumb bugs drove me insane and the music was boring. So as most of you probably know, this was a Pandaria launch raid and it had only about 6 bosses. It was sliced between Mogoshan Vaults and the Terrace of the Endless Springs. I remember not liking this zone the instant I walked into the dungeon entrance. Right from the word go, you have some insects impaled on some spikes and then the chattering all in the background, and it never seems to end. Even when you lower your volume, somehow that noise still manages to get into your headphones. And it seems like nobody likes these insect dungeons such as Heart of Fear or Encourage, and nobody likes troll dungeons either, but those for a different reason. With insect dungeons, it's like they're too weird and they're too alien and they're too purple. Everything's purple or orange or insecty. I'm personally just glad it wasn't overly long. I mean, you blast through this place really quick. You got these other raid instances to do, so it's not like it's a monotonous journey. I'm actually wondering if the developers kind of knew that people wouldn't really like it that much and they intentionally made it a bit short so you could just blaze through it. The bosses themselves were interesting, like I have nothing negative to say about them. Ones like Garrulon are infamous, then you have that wind boss that makes you walk through the tunnel as fast as you can. I mean, pretty much every raid boss post BC is incredibly interesting and intricate, and they got so many mechanics, even some bordering on too many mechanics. I don't want to get into that whole argument of whether they have too many mechanics or not, but you think about something like Amber Shaper, where you put into a vehicle and you're supposed to just learn this new rotation within 3 seconds. Every new raider has to do it, and it becomes a trial and error kind of thing. That sucks. But as I said before, I really don't have that much negative stuff to say. It was just something a little bit different that we haven't had in quite a while, and the only thing I have left to say about it is... So now for another dishonorable mention from Tariel and Varitas. My least favorite is probably Encourage. It was long and kind of boring, plus it didn't feel very epic crawling around in the ground with a bunch of bugs. Besides the depressing atmosphere, I feel there were major design flaws like Viscidus requiring frost damage to kill, the chaoticness of Twin Emperors, horrible deaths when healers get teleported to ooze during Citan, and worst of all, not being able to ride my awesome red battle bug outside the freaking instance. Plus I had the most difficult attunement to unlock for only the first people to complete it server-wide. No black battle bug for me. As a side note, dungeons and raids nowadays seem pretty easy mode compared to the glory days of vanilla and BC. Remember resist gear? So the people who voted against Encourage were around in vanilla when everything was really buggy, no pun intended. The boss mechanics weren't really fleshed out. Usually they only had 1 or 2 things you gotta do, such as you mentioned, Viscidus, where you gotta just do frost damage against it. Like that's the fight. You just do frost damage. Once you do enough, once he freezes up, that's it. The boss is dead. And the thing about bosses like that, where you have a very specific mechanic, and if you don't have any frost damage like on your character, you basically don't kill the boss. Like it happens to this day. If you're farming for the pet that it drops and you go there and you didn't realize that you needed a frost weapon, then you go into like Wowhead and you look it up and someone's like, yeah, you need to get like a frost enchant if you're not like a mage or something. So then you're standing there like, what? that's the most bizarre mechanic I've ever heard. And then you have to actually go out of the raid to enchant your weapon and then come back and then manage to kill it. And even that takes a while because you get the boss down to 0 health and he's still alive because he has to freeze up, and there's like a thing that pops up that says, Viscidus is freezing, Viscidus is frozen, Viscidus is about to explode into ice, and then he finally does and it's like, yes! Can't even imagine how frustrating it would have been back in the day if you bring along some raiders and like your raid leader forgets to tell everyone to put some frost things onto your weapon or something like that, and then it's just a case of, well, it'd probably be easier if we just brung a full set of mages and just had them all in frost spec. Like stuff like that these days would not fly whatsoever, but back in those days when it was like 40 man, I guess it was alright. The trash in this place took, I'm not even kidding, hours to clear back then because they just kept respawning. It was all bugs. It was just gauntlets full of bugs. And not to mention, not only would it respawn like as you're killing it because it's a gauntlet, but the actual trash, all the trash in the instance, back then it would respawn after like an hour or two. Like before you even get to the boss, all the trash respawns if you're not quick enough to keep pushing forward. That was just to make sure that people weren't spending, forever just standing there clearing trash. But then it's a case of you got this gauntlet full of these constantly respawning bugs, but then you have trash after and before it. So let's say you have a wipe and the trash before this gauntlet respawns, right? So the guys running back, they would have to get the whole raid to go back to clear the initial pile of trash, and for that to happen they have to go through the gauntlet. Either that or they all have to die and then come back and then do the trash all over again. It was absurd. So as Terry Allen mentioned, you do have to do an attunement for this one, and attunements are nice, right? And I know you guys spoke out on the last video saying that you liked it back when you have to do attunements to get into these places. It was nice because it made the people who actually put in the effort get into the raid, and it would get rid of all the scrubs, as it were, that are in LFR today. But it also goes against playing with your friends. It's so annoying recruiting like a friend into your raid team and they're not attuned, so you have to go back and help them get through all of these little instances just to get them prepared to actually be able to do the raid. It did make instances more epic, but it also pissed off people who just wanted a raid. If they were to bring it back today, they'd obviously have to have a system in place where if you want to recruit a friend, one that's probably in your friends list, then you could accelerate their process of getting the attunement or something like that to make it easier for your specific friends to get in, but randoms have to put in the effort. Anyway, moving on to the third least favorite raid in all of Warcraft. So we have a comment here from Jostor1, and this is for the battle for Mount Hyjal. It was meant to be a huge and epic battle, but in the end it was just a trash clear with a slightly harder trash mob in the end. For each boss, you have to clear many waves of trash, and if you wiped at any point during the trash or the bosses, you have to start over with the trash. This meant that each attempt of a boss would take a good 30 minutes. Luckily the bosses weren't that hard, but unfortunately that instead made them quite boring. Then we had Archimon. He didn't have trash, but was in a league of his own in terms of difficulty. But it wasn't hard in a fun way, just random and unforgiving. There are many ways to die, especially the falling thing, and if one person died, there was a good chance the raid would wipe since he gained a new special ability. So the Battle for Mount Hyjal was released at the launch of BC along ones like MacLeod, Karazhan, and Gruul's Lair. So they wanted to capture that Warcraft 3 feeling of all or nothing where you have each base and you gotta make sure that each one survives for a certain amount of time and then you keep going like that. So as Jostor says, when you wipe on trash for a boss, that's basically it. So this is something kind of unique, but it also turned into a trial and error fest. It's like back in the day when you did Nintendo games and you would like get killed 3 times, then you have to do the whole fucking game all over again. Like that's basically the feeling they were going for here, that old school kind of retro get killed hard as fuck and all that. I'm pretty sure they just put Hyjal into the game because it already existed. They had the landscape there built from vanilla WoW, and they just never happened to use it. It was always there in the world, you just couldn't go there and do stuff, and there was no mobs there was no NPCs, it was just a barren wasteland of nothing. I remember going back to that open world Hyjal back in the day, and there was that huge Archimon skeleton on the tree, and there was the sign that said under construction. So probably one of the developers turned around and said, what if we used that in the game before Cataclysm? And the rest of them were like, yes, totally, let's do that. But the problem was there was no point going back to the Battle of Mount Hyjal in the Caverns of Time. The Infinite Dragonflight didn't actually do anything to cause any ripples in the timeline. They weren't there at all. We were sent there to help our forces defend against Archimon, even though we already know they succeeded and our involvement didn't actually do anything to help the situation. Why the hell did we go back to help them? Nobody knows. When Blizzard was asked exactly why we went back to help them at the Battle of Mount Hyjal, they essentially said, because it would have been cool, because we think it was a good idea, because going back there to see the Warcraft 3 battle seemed like a good idea at the time. They didn't have an explanation, they just thought it would be awesome. And I guess that's fair enough if you're incredibly lazy and you just don't have, David Kozak and his team to say like, just make it just Caverns of Time, the Bronze Dragonflight, they just go back and help them, it'll be cool. What I would like to see personally is for this Burning Legion history piece, as it were, of Archimonde coming down to hump the World Tree. See it come back into the game present day, when we have a Burning Legion expansion. It'll be a good way for people who haven't played Warcraft 3 to see what happened when the Burning Legion came back that one time during the Third War and attacked the World Tree. Like, people could actually see that. They could see the old heroes like Thrall and Jaina and Tyrande and Malfurion all defending in like a joint Horde and Alliance thing. So this raid, like 90% of the other raids that I've talked about, should come back as a scaled raid for max levels. We will see one day. At least bring it back as a story scenario, and that'll do. And now the number 2 worst raid in all of Warcraft, with a comment from Aurea Gruber. The worst raid, Trial of the Crusader. Nearly the entire raid takes place in the same room. It is the shortest raid tier in WoW to date, 5 bosses, and there is no trash. Trash is a good thing in moderation. Raids should have trash. Absolutely, raids should have trash. I've done an entire video detailing my thoughts on the topic, and the conclusion you come to is that too much trash is bad, not enough trash, i.e. no trash, is worse. So Trial of the Crusader was a filler raid following Ulduar. So the reason they made it so short and compact, all set in one room, is they wanted to focus on Icecrown Citadel and its 5 men. This has been confirmed by their devs. But it was also an experiment to see if players cared about environments when it came to a raid. The conclusion they came to is that people care about it a lot. Otherwise it would not have appeared on this list. It also happened to be the patch that introduced vehicle combat, which was universally criticized. Now, vehicle combat does not make its appearance in this raid. It made its appearance in the 5-man, which was inspired by this raid. But between that, the fact that you're at like a tournament to prepare for the Lich King, and this awful raid, people just did not like that patch at all. But the key problem was that Blizzard never explained that this was supposed to be a filler patch. They just produced it and said, the player base will make do. And the player base did not make do. They complained pretty hard. The thing is, I personally didn't mind this raid that much. It was nice not having to clear trash constantly just to reach a boss, which was the fun part of a raid. You don't even have to run anywhere, it's all set in the same room. The bosses come to you. I also appreciated that it was like a small raid tier, because after doing Ulduar and Naxxramas, we have like 500 gazillion bosses. Then you come here and it's just 5 very set bosses, all one after another. I liked that. Nobody else liked that, but I appreciated that. It was a breath of fresh air before we get shoved into ICC. Now, as for specific fights in the Trial of the Crusader, things like the Faction Champs, which was essentially like a PvP fight in a PvE environment, it was an interesting mix-up, but back then I was a little bit of a raid leader, and every time we got to that fight, I would just like hand off the responsibility to someone else and say, you tell everyone what to do. I don't know what I'm doing. PvP, CC, I don't even know what's happening. So please take over. I'm going to research the next boss, and that's that. So it bored me to death. But the rest of the raids, like that big Yeti dude, the 2 ladies with the rifts, then you had Lord Jaraxxus. All these fights were just fun. I just enjoyed them. I wouldn't want to do these fights for 9 months, but it just felt so unique and it felt so condensed and fun. You spend more time like talking to the people around you than you do focusing on trash or what 500 abilities does this boss have. So I can totally understand why everyone would be criticizing it. I was critical of it as well, but I also enjoyed it. It also meant you could jump into heroic mode very quick. In previous tiers you have to finish the entire place, like all 12 bosses, but here you take down the 5 bosses or so and you're pretty much done. So casual guilds that never really get to see heroic mode, suddenly they can, which is cool. And then finally, Anubarak returned in this secret underground chamber. People hated how he was killed in that stupid 5-man from early in Wrath, so they brought him back, kind of a fan favorite from Warcraft 3, and that fight was pretty good as well. I still remember from that BlizzCon that one time when you had the Anubarak chamber, and instead of Anubarak, you had Hogger just standing there, and then Hogger one-shot like everyone. He's like racing towards. That was fun to watch. So overall, it probably wouldn't be on my worst raid list, but only because of stupid reasons like the fact that I don't like trash, and not really objective reasons, just me liking stupid things. So if I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of the people, it was a horrible raid and it should be excised from the game completely. And now moving on to the absolute worst raid ever, and I know you guys will expect this one because there was a huge influx of votes for this, and I think people are still pissed about it, and rightly so. So we have another comment from Jostor1. It's actually an extension of the original comment, but he goes on to complain about this one too. Dragon Soul was bad because it was meant to be the big epic ending of the expansion, but it sort of wasn't. It didn't feel like an open instance. Instead, you just kind of teleported around. There wasn't, in fact, any two bosses in there that you walked on foot between. There wasn't anything immediately wrong with any of the bosses, but there weren't anything really groundbreaking or extremely interesting. For a tier with only 8 bosses, I'd like a bit more than that. And then came the Deathwing fight. Spine of Deathwing was boring and repetitive, but yet very hard on heroic, but not hard in a good way. It was hard because it required silly class stacking. If you didn't have at least 10 or so mages and rogues, you could simply forget a pre-nerf 25-man kill. Madness of Deathwing was also just repetitive and dull, just the same phase over and over but with a slight change, yawn. This raid came at the end of Cataclysm, and the amount of votes I got for it was ridiculous. Everyone hates this, universally hate this. When I first saw the previews on the PTR back before the final patch came out, I honestly thought it was going to be the best raid ever. It looked so epic. Like, you're fighting on the back of Deathwing, then you're fighting in the maelstrom, you're attacking his face. It looked amazing. But for most of the reasons that Justor brings up, it turns out it just wasn't. In addition, you had Thrall as the center stage, the complete, super powerful green Jesus, Metzen's love child, and he defeats Deathwing. We just pelvic thrust his spine and clip his toenails. Nobody liked that. We like Thrall from Warcraft 3 because we played as him. We don't like standing on the sidelines going, oh man, isn't he a great character? Yeah, I love Thrall. No, fuck that. We are the heroes of Warcraft. Come on. We did all this shit before now. And then Thrall shows up with his fancy little robe and his wife. And he's like, oh yeah, I've got the dragon soul. It was so stupid. I can't believe they didn't foresee how stupid it was going to be. And that was just a small problem with this particular raid. It was a problem with the whole expansion, but I digress. Now, having a small raid tier isn't really a problem. 8 bosses is nothing to really sneeze at. See, that's not bad. The problem was those 8 bosses lasted 9 months. Now, after about 4 months, that's when you start to feel the itch, you know. There's not enough bosses in here. Like, you've cleared all the bosses, like on normal mode, you progress into heroic mode, it's like, I remember doing this boss a month ago, and I'm not happy about doing it again on a slightly harder difficulty. So, if it had been 8 bosses over the course of a few months, it wouldn't have been a big deal. If this was a patch in the grand scope of the expansion, not the huge climax, would not have been a big deal. But instead, everyone got bored with it really quickly. It's not as bad as Trial of the Crusader, but at least Trial of the Crusader, we all know, was a filler patch in preparation for a bigger thing. This was a patch in preparation for nothing. Like, maybe Pandaria, but they weren't working on those raids back then. It was just a horrible excuse for a raid. I mean, back in Firelands, they had to get rid of the Abyssal Maw. Like, that was supposed to be the fire and water patch, but instead they just completely focused on Firelands and produced like a 9 boss raid tier. And here, it's as if some of the developers just fell asleep while they were designing half of the instance. They brought in all these cool 5-mans that were ridiculously easy, and then they brought in this raid tier that just suffered for seemingly unknown reasons. So they had a lot of reused art, they had a lot of reused boss models, those piss easy 5-mans, and that was only because of the feedback from the start of Cataclysm, where people kept complaining that it was too difficult, only because of the LFG system and how people getting thrown into a group with randoms, and that was the problem, not that they were too difficult. They actually weren't difficult at all, they were pretty easy. So because of that feedback, we got ridiculously easy 5-mans. Then you had that abysmal ending cinematic from Dragon Soul with the dragons. Who the fuck are these dragon people? That's what everyone was saying. Like, everyone who's in the lore knows what's going on. But the thing is, they hadn't introduced them properly. That these dragon aspects, they hadn't had their own story arc that warranted a cinematic. The Lich King had. He had Warcraft 3. He had his entire storyline from the whole fucking Lich King expansion. Who the fuck are these dragon people? Losing their powers? They don't even explain why. They just say, we've fulfilled our grand purpose. What the fuck? And then you got Thrall and like he's having a baby now. Like, where are the heroes? Where are we? What are we doing? We just killed Deathwing. Are we missing? Have we all fallen asleep like the devs who worked on this raid? It was absurd. It was crazy. But I mean, since then, the raids that have come in Pandaria haven't been that bad. They've learned from their mistakes. They only want to do big raid tiers now. They've focused a lot of their effort on raid tiers at the expense of 5-mans, because 5-mans are still a fucking joke. But raids have gotten better since then, so we've got to say that about them. So Dragon Soul left a bad taste in everyone's mouth for what was arguably one of supposed to be the best expansions. It had the best expansion launch easily by far, but the rest of the expansion was horrifying. They completely dropped the ball there. And Dragon Soul just represents how bad it had gotten. And they've gotten way better since then. A lot of the gameplay mechanics in Pandaria are way better. So that's it for my list of worst raids in all of Warcraft. Do you guys agree? Do you not? Do you think something else was bad? Let me know in the comment box. As for a topic for next week, it's totally going to be a secret. And you'll see what I'm going to be doing next week. It has to do with YouTube. It has to do with Warcraft. Make some type of connection there. Anyway, that's it. Have a fantastical one.